Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank 1 minute at a time. I am your co-host, Dev.
And I'm your other co-host, Hugh, and on today's show we are looking at minute 69, where we finally arrive at the much talked about, much heralded school reunion night at Grosse
That's
Pointe,
right.
Michigan.
Yep. And even as they arrive, they are still being supervised by our favorite NSA agents.
Yes.
So
yes.
Now, we have, for this scene, fantastic scoring.
Yes.
With a 90s piece, so much more contemporary than we've really seen for most of or heard for most of the film, barring the Hippo Club, which obviously had the Eels playing. So Faith No More, We Care a Lot. This is kind of a track that harks back to that 90s, like, yes, there are environmental problems, but we can totally tackle them, and it's not super serious right now. And a stark contrast to what we're facing now, right? And Faith No More is kind of got this peppy attitude that makes me think that I'm about to watch an episode of Captain Planet every time I hear it. But the refrain that's really highlighted in this minute is, oh, it's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
Which I think is not really about like the environmental impacts as the song originally intended, and much more about Martin's job and what's coming up for Martin in the rest of this film, which makes me feel that the inclusion of this song actually comes a little bit earlier than I'd like it to have been. I'd like it to have been at the tail end, but I totally get, I don't see how it would have fit in at that point.
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to our point about in previous episodes about editing and trying to get this reframed down from a much longer cut, etc., etc., etc. You know, I'm just going to backtrack for one moment. I just want to point out that when we cut from Debbie's house and the dad in the lounge to the exterior of the school, and we have what is basically a wide shot from slightly above. It's basically on a crane. And so you can see the front of the school as well as the cars coming in and parking. People are walking towards it. There is the most pathetic, basic, simple, poor sign. This is supposed to be a major 10-year. This is a 10-year reunion, and all there is this tiny thing that says "Welcome, class of 1986," stuck on the wall. If that was a modern film, I would have said that was CGI'd in, right? Like they've ran out of budget. It's pathetic.
I mean, I feel like this is like they were limited in what they could do on site in terms of like the property was restricting what it could use. And this is a property that has got it nailed down, right? Like there are so many films set on this location. I mean, if you've seen 10 Things I Hate About You, you will remember that tower because it's, you know, it's just that the crane shot at the end of that film as the band is playing. I can't remember who it is, which is killing me, but the band is playing on the roof of that tower. This is like classic you know, Hollywood high school set location,
right? But so even so, I know you said what you're saying. I get what you're saying. We've also said before that this film does not have the biggest budget in the world, right? I get that. But what I find interesting is in going with that choice, it suggests something different, which is it suggests that of all the year groups to graduate from this school, this is the one who could least be bothered. Or their alumni association was like, yeah, doesn't matter. Just, you know, what's the most basic thing? Get the year sevens to do that in art class, and we stick it up. You know, it's really pathetic. And I'm just like, oh, I get your point. Absolutely, there's probably not a lot they could do. But as the camera pulls back and further up, and you can see, as you say, the tower, the whole building, you can see the cars, and then the crane starts to lower into the car park. That sign is so tiny, it just disappears.
Yep.
It's like there's nothing over the doors. There's no balloons. There's nothing.
There's no like this way to the entrance either. So like in a real world context, it's just like, well, I mean, if I'm arriving late and everybody's already inside, like where the hell do I go? I don't know. Like
it's such a pathetic excuse for a reunion. And I think that kind of, I mean, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm saying I think that's the point. I think in the end, whether it's a budgetary thing or not, that's what we get from it as viewers, right? Is we get that and we're like, whoa, you know.
But for a rich suburb of Detroit, it's a little lackluster for sure.
It's not great, is it? It's kind of like, really, guys, is that the best you could do? But then that brings us, as you say, to the NSA agents, because that camera shot moves us towards them,
It does.
and
It's a really nice camera shot,
it
actually. Like,
is.
there's a few camera like boom camera shots that are done in this film
Mm,
that sometimes fit, sometimes seem a bit weird.
hmm
This one, just as a kind of setting shot, right, to set the location and to
hmm
establishing shot. That's the phrase I was trying to spit out of my mouth. As an establishing shot, it's super well done, right? It has that wide angle, and then it brings us right into the moment.
hmm
It brings us. I mean, there's a quick cutaway to um, Martin and Debbie
Yeah.
in a separate camera angle, which is a little unfortunate. But then it kind of resumes and comes back into the thing, and I'm assuming that's to cut them to two different angles. I'm just
Well, it's
checking
about
if I'm
perspective as
remembering
well,
this
though,
right.
because it's
No, actually, they don't cut away until after. Okay, so the tracking shot is complete. It's a
yeah, the
really
tracking
nice
shot is
shot.
complete,
I
but
love it.
then what it's all about is keeping us at the car with the agents.
Hmm.
So when we see
So
Martin and
you've
Debbie,
then
it's
got that
their
huge zoom,
viewpoint.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, it's all about seeing it from their perspective. We're putting Martin and Debbie back. We can't hear them, right? We don't, not even like in the distance. We can't hear them at all. They are just doing
yeah,
their thing, and we are entirely the agent's perspective is our perspective. And this is where we get some choice dialogue from our
yeah.
wonderful
So
comic actors.
absolutely, yeah. This feels like it's a very typical like buddy, well, like stakeout kind of dialogue where you're trying to tell a story because you don't really have anything else to do, right? And the
Right.
story is like, is Martin really like, does he really like her? Is he just using her?
Hmm
Is he just toying her along? They also know who his actual target is, right?
Oh
Everybody
yes,
assumes Martin knows who his actual target
everybody
is.
except Martin.
And so everybody else is coming at this entire thing from a completely different perspective to Martin, who
Yes.
is just like head over heels for a girl that he hasn't seen in 10 years, which is a story nobody would believe even if he tried to tell them.
Yeah,
Just like his real world, like his high school friends don't believe him when he says he's a hired killer,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's that same, like, it's completely implausible. But and there is some like weird creepy comments with, I like her hair, I bet it smells really nice. And what I feel like there are a couple of things at play, right? On the one hand, right, you'd probably get some super crass comments
Mhm.
in that kind of situation that you didn't want to have in this movie because it's not the kind of movie it is, and that's not the tone that the movie wants to set. But you still want some kind of comment in there about how she looks, because that's kind of what you're expecting in this kind of dialogue. And so they play
Okay.
it a bit midway. But
Mhm.
then the point you made just before we started recording, Hugh, I think is super valid,
Mhm. Which one was
which
it? Sorry, we
is
made so many points, I've lost track.
how the comment about her hair plays
Oh,
out.
right. So here's the thing, right? So there's two things going on here. One is in yesterday's episode, we talked about how Debbie torturing her father and her ex by putting them in a lounge together without her is potentially a deliberate ploy by her, just because she's getting her revenge. Um, but also how it's backstory. It illuminates her character with her absent from the room. And I was saying how a more modern film, even films at this time period, were starting to not do that. The women's agency included the ability for the characters to be able to establish their own nuances on camera within the scene. However, because we're now reverting to the point of view of these NSA agents, we've got two, and because we're starting to lead towards the end of the film, we're starting to ramp up the tension. And we know these two guys have said before, as they need to let Martin do the job, and then they can kill him. And Azaria's character giggles at the idea of the word neutralize. Right, so it's if they're not drunk or high, then there's a certain psychosis here being revealed. But while his psychosis focuses around um, blank, the idea of killing him, even though they're not technically out there to kill him. That's not their job. They're agents who are supposed to be doing comms, but actually they do wet work when they feel like it. But then Freeman's character, Kenneth McCullers, his focus is Debbie. And his focus is not, okay, we need to keep her out of the firing line, or we need to worry about the collateral damage, or any of this stuff. He's just like, lusting after her straight away. It's all about the distant lust. And the thing is, by 97, we've had Silence of the Lambs, and we've had Manhunter, and we've had, I think by this point, we've even had California. Serial killers and their obsessions are part and parcel of television and film at this point, more than ever. And there is something about the way Freeman plays that scene to camera, because he's not looking at Azaria. The camera is outside the car looking at him, and he's looking through the windscreen at Debbie and...
through the camera at Debbie, who's the other side of that camera,
And so we get the full view of the man and his focus, and he says it in such a Norman Batesy kind of horror movie way. It's I've never noticed before now how so ick it really is. I'm really genuinely quite uncomfortable.
And I think it's intentional that it happens, and that it happens at this point, because this is the point where we need to stop liking these characters.
Yes.
We need to be okay with the fact that they're not coming out of this one. Spoiler alert. Probably should have said the spoiler alert before I said that. But
hey, sorry, we're doing a minute-by-minute movie podcast, right? If you've listened this far in and you haven't actually seen the film, then dude, what are you doing?
Yeah. You need to change your perspective on these two characters, who have been a little bit of comic relief, a little bit of wisecracking at the expense of the main characters. They are very much the comic, the comic element in a true Shakespearean sense of it, except they're a double act.
They're Guildenstern, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Yes,
that's exactly who they are. Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not how they come out of this film.
No.
And so we need to change their role, and that's, I think, why these kind of comments come in, because they're not unexpected for these characters. They're not out of the ordinary. They just help the audience change their perspective on them.
Yeah. I think also this is the increasing seriousness. This is where the film is starting to move towards this collision of the two genres, right? The rom-com and the action thriller, right? The hitman thriller, right? These two genres themselves it's not just that the characters are on a crash course with each other. The genres themselves will crash as part of that. And therefore we have to take, as you say, we have to take these two guys more seriously, but we also need to acknowledge that these two guys are also psychos. We know Grosse is a psycho. We already knew that, but we've never seen these two guys in action yet. This scene lets us realize that they are on Grosse's level.
Yeah, and from like a kind of an American psyche, they are actually in some ways, worse than Grosse.
Yeah,
because Grosse has the desire, the ambition to make it on his own. Right? To actually be the outlaw, the wild card, the frontiersman that American culture has such adoration for.
Yep.
Admittedly, in a very suspect industry, but he's gone out there for himself. He's made it. He's trying to start up a thing. He wants to be the head of something bigger. He has the ambition.
Yeah.
These two have all the same urges, all the same desires,
Yep.
but they're playing it within the system. They didn't have that courage, that that ambition to go out and do their own thing, forge their own path. They've just stuck within the lines. And that, I think, a lot of ways kind of portrays them as being even less likable. And I keep thinking back to Miami Blues and to how the protagonist there is very much Grosse's character in many ways, right? Operating completely, outside of any rules imposed on them by others. Whereas Steve and Kenneth are both Lardner and McCullers are both kind of playing in within the predefined rules that the
Or
man has made for
supposedly.
them. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
for the most part.
I
Right?
mean, I think this is where we come back to the point you and I were making last episode about Newbury Senior and his job and that world of modern military industrial complex America, right? I mean, these guys are supposed to be government agents and they
Yeah.
are acting like hired killers
Yep.
and psychos. And it's like, that doesn't seem impossible, right? At this point in time when we see the film. You know, when the film comes out, this seems perfectly plausible, perfectly potentially real.
Yep.
So I think that's kind of, yeah, that's what this scene does very, very effectively. But also that idea of how we switch from he's using the idea that they are convinced he's using Debbie, and the idea that they think that makes him worse than them.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
what? Okay, all right. You guys think you're better than everybody. You really do. And then and then suddenly, again, in sort of psycho killer fashion, you know, Freeman shifts McCullough's tenor from "Oh, isn't she dreamy?" to "He's a dick. I'm gonna kill him." You know, like
Yeah.
proper, like really relishing that switch, but also the switch seems automatic. Like this is who he is as a character, right? He can't
Yep.
help himself.
Yep.
And then we get that lovely bit of comedy. I should have worn a skirt. I should have brought my gun, right? Kind of thing.
Yep.
Which is you know, contrasts Debbie and Martin with the dialogue we've just been hearing, right?
Yep.
Because you know we know that we've just been overhearing the fact that there's people trying to kill him. As they go up the door into the doors, you know, Debbie's like, "Oh, I should have worn a skirt." 'Cause she's got pantsuit on, and
Yep.
he's like, I should have brought my gun." And like, we saw him put the gun away a few minutes ago,
Yep.
right? It's a
Yep.
really deliberate thing he made. He made an effort to follow the advice of his doctor.
Yeah, it's. I mean, again, we've kind of talked Chekhov a few times here. This is the
Mm,
antithesis of Chekhov's gun.
yes,
You get shown it. It gets time on screen to explicitly not be present
yeah.
when it's needed.
But once
Not
more,
that it's needed yet.
no, exactly. But once more, Debbie misses the cue of what this means about Martin
Yeah, and I always feel like
again.
that line is a little weird, right? Like this whole thing of like saying something, people going what, and you saying something that's very close to it, but
Mm,
not quite the same.
mm,
Except this isn't all that close, right? Like,
right.
and it's like I'm not sure I'd have just let that hang if I were Debbie. Like, I
No,
feel like I would have.
she's let so much hang in this film so far, and it just
Yeah,
feels really odd that at this point this is the one that she lets hang again.
yeah,
But then it also reminds me of, again, to draw. We've mentioned the X Files when we're discussing Joan Cusack's character Marcella. But this reminds me of that whole interaction between Mulder and Scully, you know, where for years Scully somehow fails to see the thing that proves that the paranormal exists. Like,
yeah,
it every time gets knocked out or falls down or literally turns the wrong way at the wrong time, right? And part of that is always part of that. It became a running joke, but it was also partly metaphorical, right? She doesn't want to see
yeah,
this stuff, and I feel like maybe that's the thing here with Debbie is Debbie doesn't want to hear
yeah,
the things that everyone else, because no one else wants to either, right? Everyone else is
yeah.
like, you know, nobody wants to actually listen to Martin and believe him. Everybody's just like, whatever, dude, whatever you mean, you know. So I don't know. I don't know. It's really fascinating. I'm not actually sure. Uh, yeah, maybe she should have pushed. Maybe she should have said something. But then also, they're about to go into a situation that neither of them want to go into again. And I love the way they lean comedy style around the doorway.
Yeah.
into the hall, right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, "I'm not going." Right, I'll go, and she just goes forward and drags him, and they suddenly look like a classic couple in the rom-com. Yeah, this is again that moment we've gone from again outdoors in the dark, in the noirish thing, and the car park and the agents. We're in the thriller world, and now we're in the rom-com world,
Yeah.
and he doesn't
Yeah.
want to walk into it.
Yeah. It's prime trailer fodder as well. Right? I see that
Mm.
that snippet, and I'm like, that's got to be in the trailer. Like
Right.
everybody knows that's going to be in the trailer. You're shooting that knowing it's going to be in the trailer because
Yeah.
it's just so primed for it.
Yep, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And then that, as we draw to this minute to a close, we see the badge table.
Yes, and we actually get introduced to Arlene Oslot Joseph. That is a name I still struggle to believe as
I know, right?
anyway. Yeah,
what-
so we'll
what a
leave all
name.
of that because we'll get to know a great deal more about Arlene in tomorrow's
Yes.
minute. So we'll
Okay.
cover it then.
Right. This was minute 69 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, Dev Zoligar and Hugh David.
And we managed to get through this entire minute without making any kind of jokes or references about it being minute 69. You can find us at all good podcast players, as well as on YouTube, X, and Spotify at Debi Radio, and on our website, debiradio.com. And for all of those, it is DEBI Radio.
And finally, if you want to make those 69 jokes, you can come and find us on the Facebook listeners group, Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. That's once more last time, DEBI Radio.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling.